Tensions inside of Europe have exploded in the last 24 hours due to an explosion that took place inside of Poland. Now, the Polish government claims that it was a Russian missile strike on the country which killed 2 individuals. The Russian Ministry of Defense denies the accusation and says that the remains of the missile which struck the village in Poland does not match that of a Russian missile. Now, obviously, in a situation like this, it's extremely sensitive. This is something that could explode into a much larger conflict. Now, in this situation, there's obviously some misinformation being given. Either one side is lying or both. It's complicated because it seems like this is the kind of thing that Russia wouldn't lie about. If Russia was going to strike to send a message, they would have done so very openly and wouldn't feel a need to deny it. There is a buildup of NATO troops inside of Poland, and Poland growing ever closer to the United States, allied, NATO, etc. So, if there was a buildup of NATO troops inside of Poland, then it would make sense to send a message that Putin is aware that it's happening and that that threat to Russia will not go unchallenged. But if this is the case, then there would be no need to actually deny having struck the country. On the other hand, this could very well be a false flag operation in order to justify an invasion of Russia. Now, false flags, apart from any kind of conspiracy theory nonsense, are actually very real. These are things that have happened in the past. Things that have been admitted to have been done. Things like the Gulf of Tonkin incident. It's been acknowledged that the sinking of the U.S. ship in the Gulf of Tonkin had never happened. That the U.S. government was aware of Japanese bombers coming towards Pearl Harbor, which even the Australian government says that they saw the flock of planes on their way to Pearl Harbor and warned the U.S. government about it. I mean, it shows that I believe it was most of the soldiers who actually died in Pearl Harbor were actually black, and perhaps were sacrificial to some degree. False flags are nothing new. Allegations of weapons of mass destruction, etc. So it is not beyond reason that the United States, NATO, but the United States as the head of NATO, would fake an incident like this. I believe it was the bombing of the USS Cole that was done by Israel, and then blamed on Iran, and then the U.S. shot down an Iranian civilian airliner, killing like 250 some odd people. So these things are not beyond happening because they already have. The question is, there is still the possibility that Russia struck it and is lying about it. But my gut feeling tells me that if Russia was going to do it, they would just simply admit to it, because they would have been specifically sending a message to begin with if they had done it deliberately. Now, theoretically, it could have been an accident. It could have been an errant missile, but also seems like the kind of thing that they would just admit that it was, that they would admit that it was an accident. The problem is all of this is tied to a situation that is very complicated, and not just complicated, one that seems very reminiscent of a sort of World War I type powder keg. I mean, I know the comparisons to World War I have been made over and over again, but I think they're accurate. I think that in this situation it is very accurate to compare this to World War I. And the possibilities of a larger military conflict taking place inside of Europe. Because we do have this East versus West thing that's still going on. And it's not something as simply as Putin bad, or East bad, or some kind of demonized Orientalism, I guess you could kind of say. This is a struggle of capitalist powers. This is a struggle between national capitals in the West and national capitals in the East, and particularly with regards to energy resources. So in this regard, this is something that we have seen before, particularly with the aforementioned World War I. Because you can even see this in some of the rhetoric that's being used. There's Jim Carrey's famous anti-Putin t-shirt, which had crossed out a hammer and sickle. Which socialism has nothing to do with that. You know, communism has nothing to do with the current conflict. If you're adamantly, anti-Russia, you would very have to acknowledge that Russia's a capitalist country. It has a capitalist economy. It has capitalists in it. It is run for profit. It is not socialism. There's no dictatorship of the proletariat. It's a capitalist country, pure and simple. But yet still they have to invoke the image of the Soviet Union in order to demonize current Russia. Now, of course, imperialists go imperialize. And they're going to be dishonest. They're going to throw Ukrainian-colored paint at a statue of Lenin, even though Lenin literally called for the protection of Ukraine as a country and culture. Which just goes to show you that the NATO simps are not very intelligent or well-read on socialism, but right-wingers not knowing anything about socialism it's not a new thing. But you can see the deliberate tactic here of trying to equate an old enemy with a new problem, even though that old enemy has nothing to do with it. But it just shows the propaganda effort in order to demonize Russia, rather than standing on the grounds that they do have. I mean, you would have to acknowledge that Ukraine have been shelling Donbass for 8 years, but they're not going to do that. Instead, they deliberately say unprovoked attack. But then never actually really explain why Putin would do that, why Russia would do that. Because it's always Putin bad, Russia bad. And because they're evil, they will naturally do evil things for no reason other than the fact that they're evil. And if you really think that geopolitics is as simple as Russia bad, you're really not very bright, or really not very educated on how geopolitics works, because that's complete nonsense. But now we're entering another phase, another more dangerous era in which we could see another world war. I was always very skeptical of us going into a new world war because, mutually assured destruction principle, people have got nuclear weapons. If it escalates to that, everyone dies, and nobody wants that. Capitalists don't want the end of the world. They don't want the end of the world because there's no money to be made in that. I mean, they'll be ignorant and deny that the world's coming to an end, like with global warming, so they can continue making money. But they won't explicitly seek the destruction of the entire world, because if you destroy the world, you're not going to get any money. And that's the point of capitalism to begin with, to acquire capital. And you can't acquire capital if everyone's dead and economy no longer exists. So I think to a large degree that will always be nuclear war will be put on the back burner. But this is a very tense situation in which even if nuclear weapons are not used, a ton of people are going to die. And that's what they're risking in this situation. This is what has been risked when there was a ton of shelling done for 8 years against Donbass. This is what was risked when the U.S. couped the Ukrainian government, which was pro-Russia at the time, and installed a Nazi government. This was all being risked, and we all have this because both the Eurasian fascists and the American fascists are seeking essentially the unipolar spot in the world. Now, Russia says they're seeking a multipolar thing, and China says they're seeking a multipolar, which is really odd because if China was socialist, as we're supposed to believe, they would be seeking their own domination on socialism over the world, which, you know, they're not actually doing. They're building a multipolar, which is not the point of socialism. But I digress. The situation is bad, and it's starting to get worse. And the killing of these two Polish individuals is something that's obviously a political tool. Whether it be a false flag, whether it be an actual strike by Russia, obviously it's very political in that context. And even if it was just a random explosion that had nothing to do with the missiles, it still occurs in a political context in which that is going to be viewed. So there's really no escaping the political angle to this. So we don't have any confirmation right now whether or not Russia actually did carry out this strike. My gut says that if Russia did this, they would say that they did it. And I believe that the US would do a false flag, you know, because they have done false flags in the past to justify wars. But I'm not wholly convinced that this is a false flag to begin with. I think a better idea would be to find someone who knows missiles and analyze the remains of the missile that struck the Polish village. And from there, we'd get a much clearer picture of what this situation is. Unfortunately, that's not me. I'm not a missile expert. I couldn't tell you what kind of missile something was from the wreckage, but I will certainly try to find someone who does know these kinds of things and who would be able to speak on the subject. So in the meantime, let's all hold tight, remain calm, and try not to let this entire planet fall into another world war. Thank you for watching. If you like this program, then please head over to my Patreon page and set up a monthly donation. It's your donations that keep this program running. Also, if you would like, please rate, comment, subscribe, and share in various social media.